the Bird Conservancy's banding station at Barr Lake, which I am thrilled to report will open for fall migration in exactly 9 days. And I'm working here with Tyler this morning, who is one of our environmental educators, who is taking care of any problems that come up and monitoring the chat box. Please feel free to enter when we talk about different birds. There are several times where you will have an opportunity to look at the bird and make a decision about what you think it is and enter that information in the chat box. And we'd love to have your ideas and thoughts as we go through about what birds we're showing you. I will add that you don't need to take notes. This will be up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. And the slides will be converted to a PDF so that you will have those whenever you'd like to review anything that we talk about here today. We are with the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, as I think most of you know. Our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats through an integrated approach to science, education, and land stewardship. Okay, fall is coming. It doesn't feel like it right now, but it is. Some birds have even started to migrate. And as I mentioned, we're going to start banding on August 22nd. For the next 7 weeks after that, as the sun rises, we, the staff and volunteers of the Bird Conservancy, will gather in the parking lot and make our way out to the banding station, excited about what the morning might bring. Fall migration provides a dizzying array of birds, different species, ages, sexes, plumage, etc. There are more species around than at any time during the year. Adults plus tons of young, both sexes in various plumages, some undergoing molt. I just picked out a few birds that we catch on a regular basis at Barr that give you a sort of broad sense of the kind of thing that you might see during migration. And I've given you up in the upper right-hand corner, I've given you the first bird. It's a Lincoln sparrow. And being shown here with another migrating sparrow species, and anybody who'd like to put anything into the chat box telling us what this other bird, the one on the right-hand side, is. Let's see who knows that. And I guess I'm not seeing the chat box, Tyler, so you get any answers, that would be great. Where am I? Tyler?
Yeah, I got the chat covered.
Okay.
I see someone is saying that there's a lot of LBBs.
Okay, well, let's see what this LBB really is. It's a chipping sparrow. And look at these two birds. They're both sparrow migrators. As you'll learn a little bit later, sparrows tend to migrate short distances. And they follow a pretty similar pattern. They come through here, they breed up in our mountains, they go south, but not too far. But you can see differences. Notice that the chipping sparrow has a clear breast, the Lincoln sparrow has a streaked breast. The key to the difference between the chipping sparrow and other sparrows with clear breasts that are little like this is that line through its eye. Pretty hard to see in the field. So that gives you an opportunity to think about how much fun it is to be going through the frustrating process of IDing some birds in the fall. Over here on the right-hand side, this yellow-throated bird. Anybody want to guess what that is? Tyler's not giving me any responses, so I will put that one up. Common yellowthroat. This is probably a young male, bright yellowthroat, starting to get a mask. Doesn't look anything like the adult male. And then down here on the bottom, we had this wonderful experience of catching these 3 birds all at the same time. Parents nowhere around. They were chipping away, giving us all sorts of crazy fights getting them out. The best clue about the species is that beak. Well, that would at least get you to the family. Huge beaks. We have blue grosbeaks here. 3 baby blue grosbeaks. Okay. So why are there so many birds in the fall? There are several reasons that we find more birds in the fall than other times during the year. Migrants move through more slowly in the fall. And that just means that they may come and spend an extra day or two as they're moving through. In the spring, they're really fast moving because they're trying to get back to their breeding grounds, and that's really based on hormones, and they want to move fast. In the fall, depending on the weather, they kind of meander. We also have all of the parents who have been raising young. So we have not only the migrants coming through, but a little bit of adult birds with young birds who are still around. I mean, it is the only time of year that we are going to be able to come up with a family of flickers all at the same time. It's not a very big deal to catch 5 Wilson's warblers at one time, but 5 flickers is really huge, as you can see by this group of humans who are much happier with this occasion than the birds are. More species move through on the east side of the Rockies in the fall than in the spring. For those of you, I know that some of you may be living in other parts of this country or other countries, but if we think about the east side of the Rockies, the plains, many birds coming out of Alaska or Canada migrating, they come down on the eastern side of the Rockies in the fall, and they return on the western side in the spring. It has to do with wind currents. And so we just have more birds coming through here in the fall. And finally, there are more birds, period. At this time of year, August, September, October, we have all of the adult birds from prior years that are still around, plus we have all of this year's hatcher birds. There's a pretty high mortality rate for birds the first year of their life, especially for migrants. It's just a very dangerous, arduous time for birds. So a lot of birds will die during that first year. But at this time, most of them are still alive, and 60–70% of the birds around are going to be young. Okay, let's talk about our goals for this morning. We're going to quickly share with you information about migration: what, why, when, how. We're going to talk about tips for getting the most out of fall migration, and then give you a little prep for banding at Barr. I should mention that this is going to be focused on passerines, the songbirds, because as many of you know, that's my area of expertise. But there are birds of all families that migrate, and just keep that in mind. Okay, here we have 2 really key species for migration in the fall out on the eastern plains, and certainly for captures at Barr. I believe many of you will know what these 2 birds are. Anybody wants to put into the chat box? Tyler can tell us if we've got these well identified. They are both
Yeah, we got one answer.
I finally got my chat box open. Sorry. Okay. Yes, the upper one is a Wilson's warbler. The lower one is the yellow warbler. They both look like they could be adult males. The yellow warblers, if you were out at Barr Lake today, along with the pelicans that somebody mentioned, you would see lots and lots of yellow warblers. They breed there. They've already started to migrate, I suspect. Some of the young have probably left. The Wilsons, I haven't seen one out there yet. They will start coming anytime now. The Wilsons are coming out of Alaska and Canada, and they're on their way. Both of these birds are on their way down to Central America. Okay, on the next slide, I guess, what is, okay, sorry everybody. This is what you would see in your bird book or on your bird app. If you were looking at a range map for these two species, the yellow warbler and the Wilson's warbler. The red is their breeding territory. The yellow is the area that they're passing through when they're migrating, and the blue is where they're spending the winter. These, along with most other warblers, are long distance migrants who have to leave their breeding ground in the winter, when the winter comes. Warblers tend to be almost exclusively insect-eating birds, and they make this journey. And they will make it every year, round trip, for as long as they are alive. So, what is migration? Sibley describes it as the regular movement of individuals between breeding and wintering grounds. Migration is seasonal, predictable, and repeated each year. Birds they have wings, they fly, and they move around a fair amount, sometimes for other reasons. But it is not the same as migration. This is that process that takes place every year for all the birds that do it. And something between about 75% of the more than 650 birds that nest in North America engage in some form of migratory behavior. So it's really important for us to think about why birds do this. Okay, you all know what this top bird is. We've showed it to you in an earlier photo and talked about it. It is our Wilson's warbler. And as you saw in the range map, they breed all the way up in Alaska. Oops, I gave that away too soon. They breed all the way up in Alaska, and all of them migrate. The bottom bird is a common redpoll. And you can see, and it is a bird that also breeds in Alaska. And you can see by the photo that it is not a bird that spends its winter in the tropics. So we're going to look at the common redpoll, and then we're going to figure out why each of these birds does or doesn't migrate out of Alaska. The redpoll, this map is a little bit different. The purple, again, is the breeding grounds, and it's the breeding grounds for the birds that don't move. The red is the breeding grounds for the birds that end up migrating. So the ones that are furthest north move in the winter, and they pretty much leapfrog over this group of redpolls that don't migrate. So this is a species, some migrate, some don't. And the question really is, why does that little common redpoll stay in Alaska, whereas the Wilson's has to move? And again, Sibley tells us that migration occurs when it's costs. And the cost of migration is really high. It takes a lot of energy. There's a lot of risk associated with this movement. You can just imagine what it might be like for these birds to spend 3 or 4 months of their life just traveling. But that the risks are lower than the benefits of using well-separated breeding and wintering grounds. The most important benefit of migration, as most of you probably are aware, is food. And that's clearly why the Wilson's warbler absolutely has to leave. And the redpoll eats some insects in the summertime, but is perfectly happy eating seeds all the rest of the year. And the biggest clue as to what each of these birds eat has to do with the shape of the beak. And the redpoll's beak is really pretty small. It doesn't look like it could crack open seeds. but it is cone shaped and it is a much sturdier beak than what you see on the Wilson's warbler. And it is capable of finding seeds during all of the year. Migration actually is a little more complicated than just food, although we really stress food when we're talking about it. There are other attributes of some birds that make a big difference in terms of where they go and why. And I think that there are a lot of birds where we really don't know the precise reasons they migrate, where they do, and when they do. For those of you who are under the age of something in our audience and are still looking and thinking about what you might do for a profession, there is lots to still learn about birds if you want to end up as a biologist. Okay, so let's look quickly at some of our completely or mostly non-migrant species. And again, let's look at beaks and think about why these birds don't need to move. The two birds in the upper left-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, they are two different species of, most of you probably know, these are two different species of chickadees. The top one is a black-cap, the bottom one is a mountain. There is a third, there's a third chickadee, the Carolina chickadee, which is found mostly in the southeast. Those three chickadees cover the United States. Here on the eastern slope in Colorado, we have mostly black-capped, but also have some mountain chickadees. And these birds don't migrate. 99% of these birds will not migrate. The chickadees you have in your backyard in the summer are probably the same ones that you have in the winter. And it has to do with eating seeds. And that even though they take insects some in the summer, especially when they're feeding their young, they are very good at getting little seeds throughout the year. The two at the bottom, and again, you are free to put your thoughts about what those two woodpeckers are into the chat box. Let's see if I can. The one on the left is a hairy and the one on the right is a downy. These birds are found throughout the United States, and I'll show you the range map in just a moment. And they absolutely do not migrate. They are insect eaters, but they are capable of getting into the bark of the trees in order to find insects year round. They also come to feeders, so they eat some seeds as well. And finally, in this lower corner, we have, the lower right-hand corner, we have a song sparrow. And the song sparrow is our, for those of us here on the eastern slope of the Rockies, it is our non-migratory sparrow. It is here year round, and it has a behavior that's a little bit similar to the Redpoll, a little bit similar to the Redpoll. So let me show you those range maps. Here's your downy and hairy woodpecker found throughout the United States and Canada. And boy, it doesn't move. And look how similar their ranges are. They are right together everywhere. And then we have the song sparrow, which is in the middle of the United States, non-migratory. And then otherwise, as I mentioned, looked a lot like the Redpoll. The ones that are further north move down to the southern part of the United States in the winter. So those are some of the birds that you could see here, would see here year round. Okay, we've talked about why birds go south in the winter, but I think it's also important to talk about why they come back north in the spring. It seems like, if you think quickly about it, the fact that they have plenty of food in the south in the wintertime, and there would be the same food available more or less year round, some of them might choose to stay. But there are very good reasons based on research for them to return. Research shows that birds that breed in the temperate zones, that is up in the United States and Canada have a greater rate of reproductive success. They have lower density of nest predators and parasites, and less competition for breeding habitat and food. So they come back to the United States because they need the space that they have here in the United States and Canada, because they need the space that we have here in order to breed, which is the time of year when food is most important to them. I'm showing you this slightly different map because this shows us more about how the birds are moving specifically. And this is about Wilson's warblers. And on this map is every bird that has been banded in, every Wilson's that has been banded in one location and then recaught someplace else. And as you can see, and this has been going on for decades, as you can see that there are not a whole lot of them. This process isn't the best way to figure out migratory pathways, which is a whole different webinar, I guess. But it does give you a sense of where the movements are taking place. Now, the two dots are connected by lines, and those lines are the shortest distance between the 2 points, and they aren't necessarily what the bird does. For example, those birds up in Alaska are not coming out over the Pacific Ocean. They're probably going along the coastline through Alaska, down through Canada, and then some of them will actually move over and come down on our side of the Rockies on their way down to Central America, and then work their way back up in the spring. But it gives you a sense of how, for this bird, migration is heavily centered on the eastern and western parts of the United States. And there are maps like this for all species of bird now, I think. Okay. When and how do birds migrate? When most birds have the initial instinct to migrate when the amount of daylight starts to decline, when the angle of the sun changes. This is in their DNA, and that tells them that it's time to move. Temperature and climate make a big difference as well. Of course, as it gets cooler and as their food becomes less available, those are also reasons to move or to move faster. Temperature and climate will determine how fast they move. Most of these birds are pretty smart. They aren't going to fly if they think a storm is coming. They're not going to fly if the wind is blowing in the wrong direction. They're just not going to waste their energy. As they move south, especially in the fall, not so much in the spring, but in the fall, if the weather's good, if there's a lot of food available as they're moving, they may move more slowly or more quickly. They won't move until they finish the breeding cycle and until their young are to the point where they feel like they can leave them. Some adults, after they finish the breeding cycle, molt before they move. And for those birds, which includes almost all of the warblers, the young will move first. So we will get young Wilson's warblers coming through the banding station probably 3-4 days, maybe even a week before the adults come through. And finally, location. Location is important. The further north a bird is, the more likely they are to migrate earlier. There are nesting shorebirds, for example, in the Arctic that start migrating in July. Okay, how do they migrate? Nonstop versus a series of hops, diurnal versus nocturnal, and long versus short distances. So there's a variety of ways. And we started out looking at warblers, the Wilson's warbler and the yellow warbler. And both of these birds, as is true with most warblers, because they are insect eaters, are traveling long distances. So we got the long distance migrants. They do it in a series of hops. They do not start out one day and 5 days, 8 days, 3 weeks later end up someplace without stopping. They fly 5-6 hours, and they do it at night, and then they will stop, refuel, rest, And then when they're ready, they will take off on the next leg of their journey. They fly at night because it's cooler. They are flapping birds, and that kind of personally powered flight is very, it creates a lot of heat. So they want to be moving when it's cool. They want to move when the air is calm, or at least the wind is blowing in the right direction, and they're more likely to get calm air at night. And it's also just safer to fly at night. They can easily get picked off by predators if they're moving around during the day. So let's look at birds who behave differently. Nonstop versus that short series of hops, diurnal versus nocturnal, and then we're going to talk about long versus short distances. And you can put in the chat book. I would love to know if anybody off the top of their head recognizes this shorebird. I did not when I saw it, as I was looking for a good example of a long distance nonstop migrant. It's a barred-tailed godwit, which leaves Alaska about September 1 and makes an 8-day nonstop flight across the Pacific Ocean to New Zealand. Just amazing to me that a bird can do that. And then with our hawk down here, this is a bird that travels in the daytime rather than at night. Not just the Swainsons, but all of the hawks, I believe, travel at night. Basically, they're riding the thermals, and they wait till it warms up. They pick up an air current, start moving. They get to the top, they fold in their wings, and they soar south until gravity, using gravity to make distance as they search for another thermal. So 2 other very different ways that birds migrate. Okay, now we're going to take a minute more with this particular topic, the long versus short distance migrants, partly because it is interesting when we are talking about birds that are so similar in so many ways, and also because I'm going to show you a great tool that is available to all of us as we're thinking about and trying to learn more about migration of specific birds. So these birds were caught, all 3 of them were caught on September 27, 2015 at Barr Lake. They were caught in the same run. And what we have here is 2 different species. And you're welcome to put in the chat box. Those of you who have heard me present on other occasions know that I say, this is going to be a hint, know that I say don't get too focused on color, look at patterns. But in this particular case, it is color that differentiates the one from the 2 others for these 2 species. And this one over here is a Swainsons, and these 2 other ones with the cinnamon tails are hermit thrushes. And normally, and this is a little side piece of information, normally when you're looking at a bird like this, or certainly if you're looking at a thrush in the tree, the ability to tell whether these are young or adults would be almost impossible. But the one in this group that happens to be young has a pretty strong mark to indicate that it is young, and I'm going to show you that to you just because it might be interesting. You notice these little white marks here and here. These are on the coverts, the greater coverts, and the secondary coverts. These are the wing feathers that cover, these are the feathers that cover the primary flight feathers. Those little white marks, somebody somewhere along the way figured out that the young ones have that little white dot, and it just does not show up on the adults. Now, sometimes the young will replace these feathers and they will not have that dot. So it doesn't always signify whether or not it's the absence doesn't necessarily mean it's an adult at this time of the year, but if the dot is there, it's a young one. So That's a bird that hatched this fall, last fall. The summer of 2015. Sorry, everybody. Okay. So these birds, both of these birds breed in Colorado. Up in the mountains, they breed at different altitudes, and they are both long distance migrants. But their distance of migration is much different. So I'm hoping this is going to work, Tyler. So we're going to start with, this is the hermit thrush, and this map, Tyler pulled these down, and I think he took them down off of the Cornell Lab website, although he may have taken them down right off of eBird. I'm not positive. And what you're going to be able to see is the migration pattern over the course of the year of this bird. And just looking at the colors, take a minute to sort of see reference what you're going to see. If you look over on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that the colors here they're the same, but they mean different things than they did on the other range map. The darker blue, the darker color has to do with relative abundance. So there's more of them where you see the purple, there's fewer of them where you see the orange or the yellow. And if you look down right below that, you'll see it says week of the year. And basically what we do is they run through this from January, when all of these birds are on their wintering grounds, through December. And therefore taking you back to their breeding grounds and then turning around and taking you back to where they end our calendar year on their wintering grounds again. But look, try to get this in your, you'll see this again at the end. This goes really fast. So I'm gonna do that. And you can see they go all the way up to Alaska. And somewhere along the way, you see that they breed in Colorado, and then there's this big burst, and then they come all the way back down here, with most of them ending up, most of the hermit thrushes ending up their year, or they end up on their wintering grounds mostly in the southern part of the United States. I'll show that to you one more time. Okay, and now I'm going to go on and keep this. This is the beginning point. December or January is the most important thing to look at, and get that in your head. And now we're going to move over and we're going to look at the Swainsons. Oh shoot. Okay, see where the Swainsons ends up? Really, really deep in the in the southern. We're way down in South America with most of these Swainsons thrushes. But let's look at it otherwise. Let's see if we can play this. Way up into Alaska. And coming on back down. Very similar. I tried to get this so that I could have the other end be the default, and I couldn't get it to stay there. But much more, everything about their pattern during breeding is much more similar than where they end up wintering. So let's see. And these are, okay, so why? Well, I did a little reading about this and did not feel like I got a satisfactory answer. Somebody has probably studied this more thoroughly, and maybe somebody on this call can give us a better answer. Audubon says that the hermit thrush is a hardier bird than the other brown-backed thrushes. There are also 4 or 5 other brown-backed thrushes or what I think of as true thrushes, that are not part of the mix that I'm not showing today, but also do a migration. The hermit migrates north earlier in the spring and lingers later in fall than the others. It is the only one likely to be seen in winter in North America. Now we're talking about birds, very similar birds, very similar behaviors otherwise, and yet their migration patterns are very different. And I went back and looked. We catch far more hermit thrushes than Swainsons, which is not a surprise, given what we've just seen. And the Swainsons are caught. We catch them, I guess, overall that they're earlier, but they certainly don't last as long. But the hermits come through. The first hermits are coming through earlier, and they're still coming in when we finish up in the middle of October. So in this particular year, and this is not atypical of a banding season, we had 45 hermits between September 2nd and the 10th of October, and only 4 Swainsons for the season. It was a surprise. This photo got taken because it was unusual to have them on the same day. Okay, let's see. So, getting the most out of fall migration. What is likely to come through and when? I think we've talked a little bit around about this a little bit. The warblers, the insect eaters, are the birds from further away, especially that are insect eaters, are going to come through first. The sparrows are going to likely be later. A good rule is to look at the beak, which helps you decide what they eat, which helps you decide when they are likely to come through. But let me tell you, there are lots of exceptions. A good example of the Spizella sparrows, the chipping sparrow that you saw in that first slide is the Spizella. That bird comes through early because it has a unusual behavior. It moves and then it molts. So we oftentimes get very young chipping sparrows arriving the first or second week that we are out banding at Barr Lake, and they will then stay around for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and they will molt from their streaky breasted baby feathers into their first adult plumage, and then they will move on. So there are a lot of exceptions to these rules, but in the beginning it's mostly going to be birds like warblers, and in the end is when you're going to be picking up the sparrows. An abundance of young birds, we've already talked about that. So when you are out birding in the fall, you need to be looking for what a hatchier bird, you need to know what a hatchier bird looks like, and we'll give you an example of that. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about webinars, websites, and organizations that do field trips, because the best way to become a better birder at any time, certainly in the fall, is to be out on field trips with people who really know what they're doing. So I was preparing for this, and at the same time that I was doing that, I got a DFO, an email from DFO, which is the Denver Field Ornithologists, and they were advertising upcoming webinars. And I thought, wow, this is perfect. And these are programs that DFO would do in person if it were not for the coronavirus, but they have gone online and are doing webinars instead until the coronavirus pandemic is over. But the first one is going to be a week from Monday, August 24th, and Greg Goodrich and Chuck Huntermark, who are both super birders here in Colorado, are going to be doing a program on eBirds. And eBirds, if you are not familiar with it, I referenced it when we were showing the slides where we had the migration pattern moving. And those slides, that information came from eBirds to Cornell. And eBirds is a little tricky to get used to. I think it's difficult to work with, but once you get started, It's a great way to figure out where birds are and where you, if you want to go a specific place, what you might see there on any given day. And Greg and Chuck will do a great job of making it easier for you to navigate around eBird. There also is a webinar planned for September, which Ken Kaufman is doing on patterns of bird migration in North America. These programs are free. DFO is a membership organization. I think the membership is like $25 or $35. And if you are living in the Denver metro area, I encourage you to join. I started listing organizations that do field trips, and most of which are free or close to free. Most of them are not doing them yet. They canceled their field trips because of the pandemic. A few of them have started up again, but my understanding is most of them are doing them for 6 to 10 people, really limiting the number. So you really need to be the first ones in the door. But this is a slide to keep for years that are more normal, because getting out on a field trip with these groups really, really helps to improve your birding skills. And the other resource that is good right now is the CoBirds listserv. If you Google CoBirds listserv, it will come up. You don't need to join or do anything if you just want to go on and look and see what people are talking about, where they're birding, what's happening. You can do that. But if you sign up, you will get, you can request that it be sent to you on a daily basis, which is what I do. And I read through it on days when I have time and let it go when I don't. As a bander, I post daily on what we're seeing out at Barr Lake. How many birds we banded, where they're coming from, that sort of thing. Gives you an idea of whether it's worth coming to visit our banding station. Okay. Improve your at-home migration viewing. Most of us are spending a lot more time at home, and we're spending a lot more time watching birds in our yard. So I thought I'd put in a slide about that. Most of these, some of these can't be done now. I mean, choosing some plants that flower in late summer and early fall, probably it's too late to do that. But the next 4 points here, all of these you can still do because they require you doing nothing. They require that you not prune your trees and shrubs until most of the migrants have had time to come through. It requires that you leave some leaf litter on your lawn so that foraging birds can find food. These are all things that will make you feel less guilty about not doing yard work until you get into the wintertime. The photo is a cheat. Obviously, that was not taken in the fall, but it does show what happens with rosy finches in South Park in the wintertime when people put out feeders. All right. I mentioned the challenges of identifying young species, and I'm going to give you a really good example here. This is a bird. This is a sparrow, comes through Colorado. Actually spends the winter on the Front Range in Colorado. It's a very well-known sparrow species throughout the United States. Some of them migrate, some of them don't. But the ones here that come here, they are here in the wintertime on the Front Range, up in the mountains and further north in the rest of the year. We don't have them around here in the summer. And you can see it's a sparrow, it's a clear-breasted sparrow, brown and tan cap. And some of you will know what this is. And we see them there are just tons of them. You'll see 20, 30 of them in a big flock someplace. And this is what you will see, and you will wonder what in the world it is. And then you will see one of these. And this is our very well-known WhiteCrown Sparrow. And what you've got in the bottom is the adult, white and black on the crown, signature characteristic of the WhiteCrown Sparrow, and the one up above is young. But at this time of year, so many of them are young. that you can see an entire flock and there might not be more than 1 or 2 adults. So that gives you a sense of why it's important to be looking at the plumages of younger species at this time during the year. Okay. Prepping for fall. Just to let you know that things are going to be a little different this year, but we are going to be open. We will be open for visits Tuesday and then Thursday through Sunday from August 22nd to October 11th. Reservations will be needed. We will do that in 1-hour blocks, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, no more than 6 people per hour. And we will be following all COVID protections. We will require masks and social distancing and that sort of thing. Our anticipation is that this will not fill up too quickly, that unlike the bird walks, of which there will be, which these organizations that are doing them are doing only 1 a week or 1 a month, there are lots of opportunities to come out for one of these 1-hour blocks. And Tyler is going to have complete information to provide to all of you very shortly. We're just getting the final decisions about how this is all going to work made. On Wednesdays, we are going to do a live virtual program that you would be able to see from the comfort of your home between 8 and 9. If you are trying to decide whether or not you want to come all the way out to Barr for an hour in the morning, you can go on and watch that sometime and see what you think. Those of you who've been out to the banding station before, there will be some, it will feel a little bit different, I think. We will not be able to allow visitors to release the birds or to touch them because it just gets us too close to all of you visitors. But otherwise, I think it's going to be a more intimate experience. 6 people per hour. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 most days. And it really will be an opportunity to learn and share and ask any question that you might possibly have. For those of you who are new to this, we will get you out to visit the nets, and you can watch as volunteers take the birds very carefully and safely out of the nets so that we can take them back to the banding station and band them. We will show you the banding process and how we weigh and measure them, which is the photos on the left-hand side here. And then you will just have an opportunity to learn much more by observing live birds up close. The bird in the left-hand, in the right-hand corner, upper corner, that's the only kestrel we have ever caught. The 2 birds down below, where I've mentioned learn differences between similar birds. You can see that these are both Wilson's warblers, but the one on the left is a young male, and the one on the right is an adult female. And being able to see that cap pattern and the shininess or not is really important to being able to separate those birds. And finally, this interesting looking girl up here, with the yellow head, is a close look at a rare bird. This is one of my favorite shots. I just love this bird. This is a prothonotary warbler and the only one we've ever had at Barr. And this is the way, this is a stunning, even more stunning looking bird when it's an adult male, but this young one was just spectacular, I thought. Okay, that's my program for the morning. I'd be glad to take any questions. I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions outside of this presentation. And I look forward to seeing many of you at the banding station. So Tyler,
Awesome.
Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Meredith. I feel like I learn so much every time we talk about migration. We do have one question from Karen. She's asking, how long have you been banding for? And what is the process for being a licensed bander? She knows it differs by state.
I had my first banding experience in early 2000s, I believe. I was on a research project in Costa Rica, and I started banding spring and fall for Bird Conservancy in about 2005. So it's been a while. People become banders in very different ways. Students, people in college now, people going to school now, there are many programs, some of them affiliated with universities and some of them not, that will allow you to learn either through internships or actually, not classroom, but actual credit courses at colleges and universities. A lot of people also learn by hanging around at banding stations and begging for the right to improve their skills, which I have to admit is what I did. But most people are learning in connection with their college educations now.
Awesome. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to type those into the chat window. This is one of our webinars into the fall migration. We're actually going to do another webinar in September that's going to dive a little deeper into fall migration and kind of give you other little tips and tricks on some different birds. We focused a lot on kind of the overall fall migration, so we're going to go a little bit more in depth in our next webinar, which will be September 10th. But if this is the first time you've heard about bird banding, we have a great webinar that our banding coordinator Colin did a couple weeks back. It's posted on our YouTube channel, and that's where we post all of these recordings of our webinars. I think this was our 20th webinar we've done this spring. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope we see some of you out at the Barr Lake station. I'm extremely excited to get back out to a banding station and see all the cool birds that we get at Barr Lake. We should have our registration up by the end of the week during this week. So I'll be sure to include that link for everyone that registered. But again, thank you so much for joining us. We love teaching you all about birds. It gets us really excited. And thank you, Meredith, for presenting.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.